This is part 3 of a seminar John Blank gave at Cabela's in Tulalip, Washington. John has over 25 years experience in the meat cutting industry and has processed over 1,000 big game animals. In part 3, John will talk about taking care of your meat, the aging process, and more.
On the skinning process. I threw this slide up here because a lot of people get intimidated the bigger the animal gets and dealing with it. Well, the skeletal structure on the goat that I have in the cooler that I'll process up for you, and an elk and a moose, it's all the same. So you have the same skeletal structure, you have the same muscle structure, and so there's just a couple areas that you got to be aware of. When you're removing a hind leg, you have the joint right at the hip. That socket or that hip joint needs to be removed so you can get that hind leg off. The front leg, it's not joined at all. It's only held there by muscle. So that can easily be peeled off. Your spinal column is the same in all animals, just the thickness and density of the muscles different. And that's the same in every animal. So don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Walk through, investigate, look at the muscle structure, look at the skeletal structure, and be able to process it at your house and save some money, but in the field be able to take care of your meat as well. So quartering an animal, semi-boneless, and this is what most people do, you want to remove the front shoulders. Get those front shoulders off. You're going to remove the hind legs, as I've been talking about. You're going to bone out the loin meat and the rib meat, and then bone out the neck meat. And really, that's all there is to it. And you're saying, yeah, but you've done it forever. It's really not that hard to do, and I'll walk you through it. If you have to take the bones out with you, and you have to end up using a Wyoming saw, you're going to want to split the animal in half right at the last rib. So you'll go one rib in. That's a traditional area where you break. The rib eye from the short loin is right there. And then you're going to split it right down the middle, and that'll give you 4 equal parts. And you want to go right down the middle of the spinal column. So meat home care. This is the biggest opportunity out there, bar none. And just because you've harvested an animal and you had a hard day hunting doesn't mean you get home or back to camp and crack open a bunch of beers and say, I'm done for the day. You still need to take care of the animal, or you're going to run the risk of losing a lot of product. So clean your harvest. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to the animal. It's part of our responsibility once we pull the trigger. Wipe the animal down. When you get home, cool damp cloth. Wipe that. Get the hair off of it. Get the dirt off of it. Get the nettles off of it. The better job you do using game bags in the field, the less work you're going to have to do once you get home. But again, you know, I see a lot of people, well, yeah, it's not that way. You would be amazed and appalled if I were to show you a hunting season's worth of animals and what they bring them into the meat shops looking like. Some of them, it's just grotesque, and how they could give the neglect to that animal that they harvest would just amaze you. So I'm saying clean your animal, damp cloth, wring it out, wipe your animal. If it's bloodshot and it gets blood on it, repeat the process to get it clean. Remove the dirt and the hair. You don't want to eat it. If you shot it and you shot it in the shoulders, you want to clean the inner and exit areas. Now, be careful. If you shot it with an arrow, there might be a blade left in there. So double check your arrow that you shot it with and make sure there's no blades left, because you don't want to cut yourself. Then you want to remove, if it was shot in the shoulders and you still have your whole animal intact, and this is probably more for a deer or maybe a half of an elk if you cut it in half, you want to pull those shoulder muscles back. Because what happens is the blood gets trapped in between all of the layers of the muscles, and it clots up and it starts to rot and not be as good. You're going to lose meat if you leave it sit there as you let the animal age, because once we go to process it, we're going to cut all of that away. So the better job you do at cleaning it, the better yield you're going to have once it comes time to process it. So hanging time. I'm going to talk a little bit about aging meat. How long to hang your deer up for processing. Anybody have any questions on that? Or any recommendations of how long you should let it hang?
We can't let ours hang. We hunt in September and Spokane. We can't let them.
Right. Anybody else? There's a lot of myths, and that's the reason why I threw it up here. But the bottom line is, in a controlled temperature situation and moisture situation, at least 1 week is ideal. You know, to your point, if it's hot, you can't. If you can get it in a cooler, then yeah, you can age it in a cooler or a refrigerator. There's a lot of, you know, opinions out there. I say 1 week is ideal. If you're going to hang it, make sure the temperature wherever you're hanging it is below 40 degrees. At above 40 degrees, bacteria multiplies like there's no tomorrow, and that's where your foodborne illnesses will come into play. A lot of individuals like to throw it out in their garage and they say, oh, it's only 60 degrees outside and the garage is 50 degrees, and you wonder why after you had a deer burger you kind of got a little bit of a stomach ache and you're not quite sure why. It's because you run the risk of a foodborne illness. So temperature control is the utmost. If you got to throw it in your refrigerator, throw it in your refrigerator. You know, part it out and lay the pieces in your refrigerator. Find somebody with a cooler, put an air conditioner in your garage window and get it cold. There's all things that you could do, but temperature control is huge. Yes, sir.
Got an ice chest, 200
Works just fine.
quarts or whatever it's called.
Hey, let's say it's a deer in there. I would make sure that you never stack meat on meat. So even if you have to cut like a 1x2 and run across so the meat's elevated so it can stay cool, layered in there, have ice in the bottom, and then at the top have ice in there so you get some circulation going. Don't wrap it in plastic because it can't breathe in plastic. You want the air to get around that animal in a cooler.
Like some old refrigerator trays.
Yeah, would work great. Graded trays. Yeah, because you take, and I see it happen, and guilty here, you know, just in a hurry, throwing stuff in, trying to get back home, and you throw your meat in a cooler, and you start stacking up, you know, 2 hindquarters and 2 front shoulders. If it's not cooled down all the way, that meat's never going to cool even if it's in the cooler because there's so much density and no air getting around it. So you really want to be careful on that and do the best you can to put some air gaps around it and to get it cooled down.
What type of ice is best for that? Dry ice?
Dry ice would be ideal, but if you don't have dry ice, block ice would work as well. I'd try to stay away from cube ice. Water, if it's sitting for a long time, you don't want the meat sitting a long time in water. So cube ice melts quicker, so block ice would be the best. Yes, sir?
What are we looking to accomplish by hanging the meat?
You're aging it. So
What's going to be the effect on that?
it'll make it more tender. Actually, I'm going right to my next bullet point that talks about it. But good question. That's what you want to ask. But before I get to that, air circulation around the entire animal is vitally important. Okay, so just because it's laying on the ground, it's not getting air around it. When I talked about you've got the animal on the ground, you've pulled the shoulders off, you pulled the legs off, put it in game bags and get it hanging in the tree. If you got a two-hour hike back to the truck, there and back, that 2 hours hanging is vital in getting that temperature to drop on that animal. Okay, so make sure you're conscientious to that. The minimum of 24 hours. The reason why you want at least 24 hours, if at all possible, and there's sometimes where it's just not because it's too warm, is when an animal's killed, we're all familiar with rigor mortis, right? So what's rigor mortis? The muscles contracting. Okay, so that animal is tight and tense, and rigor mortis has taken place. The reason why you aged, to answer your question, is the longer it sits, the enzymes in the meat start to break down and the muscles relax. So in minimum of 24 hours will get you past that dense muscle tense up and it starts to relax. And then from there to a week, it'll get tender. On beef, the industry average is 13 days. So there's been a lot of science on beef, on tenderness scores. And 13 days on a middle meat will start the optimal tenderness. And then from 13 to like 60 days is optimal. But it's a little different than game. Okay, and it's kept in a cryovac where there's a controlled aging process versus wild game. Number one, wild game doesn't have the fat, doesn't have the marbling, doesn't have the muscle density of beef, so you don't need to let it hang that long. The other thing that you'll run into, the longer you let that animal hang, the more it's going to dry out. Okay, so once you've gone past a week, 1 week is ideal. If you got a little cooler, leave it in there for a week, it's going to age just fine. But if you don't have the opportunity to have that good temperature control, you're going to have to process that animal a lot quicker or break it down into primals and get it into the refrigerator so it can be cooled there. There are some individuals out there that like to say, you know what, well, Grandpa says we let the deer hang in the garage until it gets a layer of mold on there, and then we go out there with vinegar and we wipe it down with vinegar, and that makes the meat super tender. Well, it's kind of like dry aging. I wouldn't eat it. Again, bacteria is your worst enemy, and you need to be conscientious of that. So 24 hours ideal, 1 week. So processing, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Basic tools you need. You need a cutting surface like I have with the poly board there, or you can use a wood surface. A boning knife. This is a boning knife here. And if you guys don't have a boning knife, I would definitely make the investment. It's 22 bucks. They're Victorinox. I've used them for 25 years in the industry, cutting meat every day, except for the last few years where I'm overseeing the operations of the area that I work for. But great steel, holds a great edge, and for 22 bucks, it's going to be the best knife that you can have. Even in your kitchen drawer. If you go to my house, my son can attest, and you open the knife drawer, all my knives are like this in there. So really good investment. That's your boning knife. You want to use a steak knife for an elk and a moose. This is technically called a breaking knife. These run 39 bucks. It's an 8-inch breaking knife. This will do everything that you need to do. Those two knives will do everything that you need to do to process your own animal. Really good quality. They're food grade safe handle, easy to clean, really nice there.
That was some great information, which is often overlooked. Make sure you move on to part 4, where John will talk about processing your game and wrapping it for the freezer.